I first met Thomas Merton, not physically, but I first met him through the first book that he had published called The Seven-Story Mountain, which was an autobiographical book in which he described his life before coming to the monastery and then his life as he began life in the monastery and his life as a practicing monk. And it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Um, in some ways, it is his most um, reachable of the books that he has written because it was biography. It wasn't full of Catholic teaching stuff that I didn't understand at all. But it gave you a window into his personhood, and it was very revealing and very interesting. And I just loved it. I kind of raced through it when I first read it. Then I went through a long, a fairly long period of my life where I didn't read him anymore. And not for any particular reason, I just didn't. And then I went to the Academy for Spiritual Formation,
Mhm.
and which was a very moving experience to me. A program of the United Methodist Church that you met every 90 days for 2 years and that sort of stuff. I ended up making friends with two people there, and we began to retreat together for years after the academy was over. And so we would pick books to read in our times apart before our next retreat. And um, very often we would pick Merton. They would pick Merton. I didn't, I, they didn't understand him either, but they would pick him. And so we tried to read Merton books, and it was complicated. It was hard. Then one year, to my great fortune, I had a friend who was a publisher at Harper San Francisco, and which was where I was first published. And they published a 7-volume set of his diaries, and they sent them to me. So I get this 7-volume set of books that are Merton's diaries that are much more like the Seven-Story Mountain than the other 20 or 30 books he'd made in between. And so I read them and had a sense that I understood him finally and fell in love with him. Around that time, after the diaries, I read Thoughts in Solitude. And they were simple, clear, self evident truths about the spiritual life that came through that book. They're not long and complicated, they're a sentence or two or three or four at a time. There are three or four or five things in that book that changed me and my spiritual life. And they came to me because I finally had come to understand him as a person. I spent an afternoon once at his hermitage at Gethsemane. You weren't supposed to go from the monastery up the hill to his hermitage. So I didn't. There was a fence, a gate down the hill on the other side from his hermitage. And he had a friend who was a photographer. And the photographer's name was Ray. And a couple of nights a week, Ray would pull up to the gate And Merton would come down the hill, crawl over the gate, and get in the truck with Ray. And they would go to Bardstown and drink bourbon together.
Oh, he is my kind of guy.
And then and then Ray would bring him back to the gate and he would crawl over the gate. So I had heard that story. I went to Gethsemane to the chapel a couple of times for prayers and stuff. But I went and parked my car in front of the gate and crawled over the gate and spent an entire afternoon sitting on his porch in his rocking chair, looking through the windows, and then walking about 30, 40 yards away. There was a big tree that he used to talk about sitting next to and leaning up against and taking his naps. And so I sat against the tree and sat in his rocking chair at the Hermitage um, pretty much all day one day. So I feel a connection to him, a deep, deep connection to him.
And as you talk about that experience, are you back there?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I can I mean I can see it. Um Namaste.